Thank you for coming. I appreciate everyone coming out to listen to me speak, but I don't really think you had much of a choice because it is a single-track conference. So, my girlfriend also told me everyone would fake laugh at that too. So, it's good my jokes are hitting already. The title of this talk is Elixir and Large Language Models: A Look Towards the Future. I think it sounds a lot more ominous and technical and cool than it is. This is honestly more of a rant of my opinions about large language models and how people should build with them. But I think this is an important topic. It's not necessarily the most technical talk I've written, but I think it is something that we should all pay attention to as a community as large language models continue to revolutionize tech and a bunch of other industries, as people are saying they will. Before going into anything further, I do have to do a disclaimer. The views expressed in this presentation are that of the speaker and do not represent the views of the United States government, Department of Defense, or Army Cyber. Okay, with that out of the way, a little bit about me. My name is Sean Moriarty. I am the author of Genetic Algorithms in Elixir. I am about to be a published author again with a book called Machine Learning in Elixir. It should be coming out sometime towards the end of the month. It's been a work in progress for like 2.5 years and through several API changes, unfortunately. Very excited to get that out. I'm also a programmer, particularly interested in functional programming and machine learning. According to Jose, I am a top 3 Elixir machine learning developer, so 3 of 3 is a good category to be in, I guess. If you follow me on Twitter, that would mean that I am in the MBA of Elixir machine learning developers, but I don't think we have enough to field a league, so hopefully I can do a better job convincing people to get involved. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that is my handle. I mostly tweet about Elixir, and a lot of times I tweet about Philadelphia sports, so if you don't like that, then don't follow me. Just a quick survey, who has used ChatGPT? This might be a dumb question in a room full of programmers, but I'm assuming pretty much everybody. Who believes ChatGPT is going to replace us? Not a single hand. Okay, cool. Just one. Oh, one in the back. Nice, okay. Who believes that ChatGPT is not useful for anything? Okay, one, nice, confident, I like it. And then who believes that ChatGPT and its successors will cause an extinction event? Good, nice. So my personal opinion on the matter is that I'm pretty optimistic about the future of the technology. I think it will be like truly transformative, but I'm pessimistic in the sense that I don't think that these models are powerful enough to cause us any worry as programmers for getting replaced or in terms of like an extinction event and whatnot. I think a lot of that AI discourse is rooted in fantasy, mainly by like strategic posturing by companies and uninformed people on both sides of the debate. I'm sure everyone is pretty sick of AI hype threads on Twitter talking about 8 prompts that will revolutionize your productivity and like these new AI tools are changing everything. It's a little ridiculous right now. This definitely has all of the makings of a hype cycle, but I don't think that discounts what is actually happening and what large language models are capable of. Fortunately, this is not an AI ethics talk, so I will not sit up here and talk to you about doom and gloom and how I believe AI is not going to kill us all. So if you want to have an AI ethics talk, you can see me after and we can debate all you want, but I will not be up here doing that. Unfortunately for some, this is also not really an NX talk, so when I was putting this together, I was talking to Jose about like what would be important for people to hear, and he suggested that I come up here and I live code a large language model, and I'm not insane. I know that I would not be able to successfully do that, so unfortunately, this is not really an NX talk. We're going to talk about NX a little bit and how you can do some things with large language models in NX, but really this is a talk about large language models and Elixir, and that encapsulates all of large language models. There's obviously external providers you can hit with OpenAI and Claude and Anthropic, all those companies, as well as things you can do natively in Elixir, and we're going to talk about all those things. Really, the purpose of this is to answer a single, simple question. Where does Elixir fit in the generative AI revolution? And I think I'm obviously jumping forward a little bit there, declaring that this is indeed a generative AI revolution, but we'll talk about that. You may or may not believe that this is a revolution. I personally do. Like I said, we'll talk about that. My personal opinion is that Elixir is the language of the large language model powered future. And I think it's a hot take, maybe for some, especially because everyone now is building things in Langchain and Python and TypeScript and whatnot. But as you'll see, and throughout my research, like for this talk, I realized that the things people are doing with Langchain and with these other large language model frameworks are exactly the things that we've all been doing, and they're following the same patterns that Elixir programmers and Erlang programmers have been aware of and have known for years, and I have some interesting quotes as well. But first, I have to convince you that this is indeed a revolution. So if you base your opinion off news headlines and tweets from AI influencers, you would certainly believe so. These are the headlines from just 3 days ago, and if you Google ChatGPT, there are going to be 100 others, headlines like this. Alternatively, you might also find articles like this, people, cherry picking examples of massive fails of ChatGPT in production. People picking out examples of tests it can't pass and things it can't do. This is my, I think, 4th talk, and it honestly was the hardest one for me to research because there is so much hype and so much doubt that nobody really has an objective opinion. Like, you really can't form any sort of opinion without taking a really strong position on either side. So like I said, this has all of the makings of a boom and bust cycle, but I don't think that necessarily discounts the capabilities of these models moving forward. I think one of the things we can all agree on is that there's this kind of like aura of hype surrounding large language models. Like, everybody is really, really excited about it, but I don't think anybody really knows what they're excited for. Probably the only useful app right now, in my opinion, that is built on large language models is ChatGPT itself. I don't know about you all, but I personally don't use any other large language model powered apps yet, and I think it's because we haven't really identified use cases that are of concrete value that we can solve with large language models yet. I don't think that means that we won't. It just means that nobody has created something besides like ChatGPT for your code base and ChatGPT for your documents. Those are interesting use cases. They're useful, but I don't think they're necessarily as transformative as people assume that they are. I think even for the most difficult to impress technologist and programmer, you were probably impressed the first time someone showed you ChatGPT. Like, I can remember when it first came out and I was playing around with it, asking it to code things, I was like, this is insane. And for the longest time, I would see myself as like a suspicious of AI and machine learning being anything capable of replacing programmers. And then I asked ChatGPT to write bash scripts and do all these things I don't know how to do, and I'm like, I'm screwed. I'm never going to make it in this world. This all kind of like, I think, is captured in this quote here by an investor in Stability AI. This is from a Forbes article. So I'll read it out loud here. The investment thesis that we had is that we don't know exactly what all of the use cases will be, but we know that this technology is truly transformative and has reached a tipping point in terms of what it can do. I think that really does perfectly capture how everyone feels about generative AI right now, because we're all super excited about it and everyone thinks it can be transformative, but nobody has really identified like a valuable, dominating use case. I can't name any LLM-centric app that dominates a particular market besides ChatGPT, and that's in a market of its own. That's the it's in the market of large language models. I think this is all captured by this quote by Chip Wen. She is a author in computer science. She wrote the book Designing Machine Learning Systems. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend checking it out. But she says, it's easy to make something cool with large language models, but very hard to make something production ready with them. I think this is beautiful because it really like perfectly captures how I feel when I'm looking at all of these large language model powered apps and demos that you see on Twitter. I can count on one hand like the things I use large language models for, and it's like tedious work in Python and Shell and other APIs that I don't feel like remembering. I haven't yet gone the Stan from South Park route of using ChatGPT to talk to all my friends, but I might go there. A little tangential, but I think this episode, if you've not seen South Park, is very interesting because there's a scene in there where Wendy is talking to Stan about something that ChatGPT had a conversation with her with, and he has no idea what she's talking about, and he's trying to fill in the blanks. And it's funny because I've done basically the same thing as a programmer. I've sent scripts off make. I refuse to learn make now because ChatGPT can just write a make file for me. And I've sent make files off to people, and they're like, "Well, why did you do that?" And I'm like, "Well, I have no idea why I did that." So I think that's pretty funny. I kind of wrap this large language model app evaluation up into 4 stages, kind of like 5 stages of grief, the 4 stages of large language model app evaluation. So when I'm sitting at night, I'm scrolling on Twitter and I see another demo built with Langchain, Pinecone, etc. My thought process usually goes, "Wow, that's pretty cool," and I mess around with it, and then I'm like, "I really wish I thought of that. That person is going to be rich. They're going to make so much money off of that." And then a couple minutes later, I realized, wait, I would never use that. I didn't even sign up. I didn't make an account. Like, why am I so, jealous, envious of this app that I'm never going to use? And then the next day, I forget it ever existed. And this, like I said, this perfectly captures what everyone is doing right now. Is we're making really cool demos, but we're not actually building useful products. And I think it's kind of an issue with how people are framing what large language models can do or how they're using them, and we'll talk about that as well. So why then am I wasting, if I am this, I guess, negative about large language models, why did I waste my time putting this talk together and discussing why I think Elixir is the language of the large language model powered future? It's because I really do believe that this is a transformative technology, and I believe that the reason that you're seeing, this hype cycle right now is because it's early. People have yet to figure out, all of the particular use cases that are seriously valuable to use in production. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that we might be bottlenecked by a number of things. Like I think some suggestions say that OpenAI and these large language model providers are bottlenecked by compute, so they don't have enough compute to continue scaling these models up. They're bottlenecked by data, but even if you consider these models, not getting better over the next 5 years, what we will do in the next 5 years is identify seriously, useful, valuable applications of them. I think it's kind of like the early .com boom. I wasn't old enough to experience that, but reading about it is interesting. Like everybody thought if you just make a website and start an internet company, then you were going to make a ton of money because everyone was going to the internet. And so you had, like what's the famous one, Pets.com maybe is a big example. Yeah, you can name 100 examples of these companies that were just like, I'm going to be this company, but on the internet, and that's apparently a differentiator. And that's a lot of what's happening right now in AI is people are treating it like I'm going to be this, but with AI, and that can't be how you frame, what your product does or what the value your product offers to the world. I also believe that large language models truly are valuable, and we will find more and more valuable use cases for them as time goes on. And like I said, it's here to stay. So we've reached a tipping point in terms of capability of what these models can do that they're going to be around, and as much as it pains me to say that, like, I think prompt engineering is not necessarily the most scientific and useful thing, I think it is important to understand that because I don't necessarily see it going anywhere. Yeah. So I truly believe large language models are a revolution, but our perceptions of the technology are wrong. And I'm going to make an argument here, and before you jump to conclusions with what I'm about to say, just bear with me for a second. So I think we need to start framing how we look at large language models as we look at a database. So I know that sounds bad because there's all these examples of like large language models are not fact or knowledge stores. There's, you don't necessarily get the same answer from them every single time. But I don't mean that in the literal sense that large language models are databases. I mean it in the sense is that we should view working with large language models as we do working with databases and building with databases. Because databases are a fundamental part of any application, but you don't go and market your product like Facebook powered by Postgres. Like it's not a differentiator. It's the database is fundamental. It enables you to do things that you were not able to do before databases were around, but it's not something that like differentiates your application from anything else. And so if we take this analogy and we kind of build on it, we can view or anticipate what the future of building on large language models and what the large language model ecosystem is going to look like. So at the lowest level, if large language models are in the same class as databases, then we have Postgres, MySQL, GPT, or their models, basically. These are the foundation models. Going up a level, we have drivers. So, drivers interact with these databases, and those relate to APIs and frameworks. And I like this analogy a lot, too, because it kind of, it illustrates as well how people are using large language models in production, because what you realize is that, 99% of people are just working at the level of calling an API, and that's how it works with databases as well. There are very few people that are actually out there developing, Postgres and developing MySQL and building drivers. Most people are just interacting with these frameworks at the highest level. Machine learning now, thanks to this AI, this large language model revolution, is very accessible to everybody. such that you can wrap a very complex workflow, a very complex model in just a single API call. Anybody who thinks that machine learning is not approachable, that's just fundamentally not true anymore. Because all it is wrapping APIs, making a single API call. If we move up the frame, I don't necessarily like this comparison, but SQL and prompts. You spend a lot more time as a programmer writing SQL than you do interacting with like the lowest levels of the driver or messing with the Postgres source code. And then ORMs, Langchain, large language model frameworks. I don't personally like, so there's a question mark with prompts and Langchain because I'm not necessarily convinced by prompt engineering yet. Like I said, I'm not necessarily convinced by Langchain yet. And I think one of the problems is that it's so early that we don't necessarily know. We're writing tools for problems that we don't know we have. Like I said, there's not really an example of an application out there that uses large language models that is fundamentally valuable to a lot of people and solves like a very fundamental problem. And so we don't really have examples like of companies like Uber designing these custom like data frameworks and everything. We don't have problems identified for what it's like building models in production. We have some early examples, but we really just have examples that are built or modeled around demos. So it's not necessarily, it's too early to tell whether or not something like Langchain is the solution to all of the problems when building with large language models. So I know that was a really long, I think, tangent. I do want to bring it back, though, to Elixir. This is an Elixir conference. So I want to answer the question, why should anyone build large language model powered applications in Elixir? And to answer this, we have to answer 3 questions. So we have to answer, how are people using large language models in applications today? What are the challenges of large language models in production? And how is Elixir uniquely positioned to address these challenges? Starting off, these are some of the more useful use cases I found of large language models in production. Chatbots and assistants are incredibly obvious use cases. Sales and marketing, I think I've seen a lot of like copywriting, writing marketing copy applications of GPT-4. Tedious automation, and then data analysis. So tedious automation, having a GPT-4 like extract data or from a news article to put into a table, as well as like the agent paradigm where you have something like GPT-4 decide what APIs to call and interact with to solve a particular problem. You can kind of condense these into 3 specific buckets, I would say. So creativity, sales and marketing, orchestration, which is orchestration of a lot of external services, and then summarization. And summarization could mean summarizing an article, or it could mean actually like summarizing something in the sense of like pulling out data. Now we have to answer, what are the challenges of using large language models in production? As it stands right now, there's a lot. But I think a lot of those will change just because it is so early on. So I've tried to identify the 3 fundamental challenges that I've seen, and in my research I saw as well. And it really comes down to, the first one is pretty obvious, but ambiguous output formats. So these models are non-deterministic, and I always think it's hilarious when like people who obsess over static types will include a GPT-4 call in their very like mission critical program, and you're like, how do you type check that it's going to return to you what you want? I don't understand it. I don't understand static types. It's fine. There's another great quote from Chip Wen as well. A couple of people who've worked with large language models for years told me that they just accepted this ambiguity and built their workflows around that. It's a different mindset compared to developing deterministic programs, but not something impossible to get used to. And for those of you that have read Joe Armstrong's Thesis, I think this kind of might resonate a little bit with a lot of the things that he says, but we'll go into that a little bit later on. I think this is something that the Beam community has accepted, long accepted. And I do think it's hilarious that people from other ecosystems are just now getting around to this fact. But hopefully this is something that could push people towards the Beam and Erlang and Elixir. Another challenge is orchestration of services. So I mentioned that I think the agent workflow, where you have large language models decide what external APIs to build on and which ones to use in their generation, is useful. And that creates a whole host of challenges when you're depending on multiple external services in conjunction with trying to generate some useful output for users. And I think that's something that Elixir has proven it's really, really good at. And then the final one that's going to stand, I think, regardless of how far along these models come, is whether or not you should host your own models or not host your own models. There are a lot of challenges associated with both. I think what you're seeing right now is a lot of people are building applications, and really what they're doing is they're just building their AI with GPT-4, OpenAI, API. But I think that's something that's going to change over time. There's a lot of challenges: latency, privacy, security, and there's also the challenge of, can you train something better on your specific task rather than relying on like zero-shot ability of GPT-4. So how is Elixir well positioned to address these issues? I think for some of these it's obvious, and for some it might not be as obvious, but ambiguous output formats. And I think I just want to answer this with this quote from Joe Armstrong's Thesis. Errors occur when the programmer does not know what to do. Programmers are supposed to follow specifications, but often the specification does not say what to do, and therefore the programmer does not know what to do. There's another follow-up question. What occurs when the programmer doesn't know what the application will do? And that's what you have when you're using something like GPT-4. 90% of the time, it might give you what you expect, but there is, and 90 might be a little high, it also might be a little low, but there's another percentage of the time where it's going to return to you something where you have no idea what to do with it. And as in this community, we kind of just accepted this let it crash paradigm where it's okay if we don't get the correct result. We were able to recover from failure very well. Orchestration of services, I think Elixir has proven itself as a fantastic language for orchestration. OTP makes it possible to build reliant, fault-tolerant applications in the face of errors. So I think this is something that clearly the OTP and Beam and Erlang and Elixir are very well suited for. And then finally, to host or not to host. So this is something, obviously, that I've worked a lot on in the past 2.5 years, is bringing the foundation of the Elixir machine learning ecosystem up to par with the Python ecosystem. One of the unique things about Elixir is that you can do all of the same things you could do in the Python ecosystem with Elixir. So we are able to use large language models with the Bumblebee library. You can build out your own infrastructure specifically with Elixir. You don't have to always depend on an external API, and I think that helps a lot. So the decision on what language to use, if it would come down to what can I work natively in the entire way, Elixir is one of the few that you actually don't have to rely solely on calling out to external APIs with. One of the other things that I think is going to become clear with this to host or not to host discussion is that fine-tuning is always going to be the better option to just depending on prompting. There's a lot of evidence out there, a lot of papers out there that show that fine-tuning on your specialized task leads to significantly better model performance at significantly lower size, like model sizes, and that can save you a lot of money for a much better model. And you can work in Elixir doing all of these things. So building out this ecosystem of the foundation of NX and what that offers is incredibly important as a language, because it gives people the ability to do these things, to fine tune their own models, and to not have to rely on external services and APIs. I truly believe the future is self-hosted models. So right now, like I said, you're seeing, I think the not so well kept secret is that everyone is building with OpenAI. But I think in 6 months to a year to even 2 years, people are going to start to transition to using the open source models. So to answer the question, where does Elixir fit in the generative AI revolution? I think it is the best language to power the large language model powered apps of the future. And I want to end on the question of, okay, so what do we need to do? I think it's important that we as a community start to identify and pay attention to this space, because I really truly believe that large language models are a revolution. They're going to change how a lot of industries operate, and if we are able to build an ecosystem of tooling around it, I think we're well positioned to grab a significant market share, in this space. I do have to give some acknowledgements now. I would shout out to Feynman at fmapp.ai and Rich at AI Studio. They contributed a lot in some of the discussion to this talk. And with that, are there any questions? Thank you.